The soft murmur of voices and the faint echo of organ music drifted through the marble halls of St. Bartholomew's Cathedral, the kind of place where every wedding looked like it belonged in a magazine, and every vow sounded like destiny. Sunlight filtered through towering stained glass windows, scattering ribbons of red and gold across polished stone floors, and guests in tailored suits whispered politely as they waited for the ceremony to begin. To them, it was simply another high society wedding in Manhattan, the union of two powerful families whose names carried weight on Wall Street and in boardrooms across the country. But Elena Hart knew something none of them did. Standing quietly near the back of the cathedral, her hands wrapped around a silver tray she had been told to carry to the reception hall later, she tried to steady the uneasy feeling building in her chest. Her uniform was simple, a black maid's dress with a crisp white collar, the kind designed to make someone invisible in a room filled with wealth. And normally, Elena preferred it that way. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant she could observe without being noticed. But today, invisibility felt like a burden she could no longer hide behind. Her eyes drifted toward the altar where Nathaniel Wolfe stood waiting in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his posture straight, his expression calm, almost too calm for a man about to be married. At 38, Nathaniel Wolfe was the kind of billionaire whose decisions could shift markets before breakfast, the quiet force behind Wolfe Technologies, an empire built from code, strategy, and relentless discipline. In photographs, he always looked distant, untouchable, a man carved from steel and silence. Yet Elena had seen something else during the months she worked at his estate. She had seen the late nights in the library when the mansion fell silent. She had seen the way he stared out across the Hudson River, as if searching for something the world kept hiding from him. And now he was about to marry Vivian Sterling, the daughter of a powerful investor whose smile dazzled every guest seated in the cathedral's front rows. Vivian stood at the end of the aisle in a gown that shimmered like frost under the morning light, every detail flawless, every movement graceful. From a distance, it looked like a fairy tale wedding meant for the front page of society. Columns. But Elena's pulse began to quicken as she remembered the words she had heard just minutes earlier behind the carved oak doors leading to the bridal chamber. She had only been passing through the corridor with a tray of champagne glasses when the voices drifted through the crack in the door. Victor Sterling's voice had been low, almost amused. "Once the vows are signed, the board votes tonight," he said, "and the empire becomes ours." Elena froze in the hallway when she heard Vivian laugh softly, a sound too sharp to belong in a church. In that instant, the world shifted beneath Elena's feet. Because those vows waiting at the altar were not just promises of love. They were signatures. And the moment Nathaniel Wolfe said "I do," the company he had built from nothing would quietly slip into someone else's control. Elena tightened her grip on the tray as the organ music swelled and the guests turned toward the aisle, unaware that the ceremony about to begin was not a celebration, but the final step of a carefully planned takeover. She glanced once more at Nathaniel standing beneath the cathedral lights, a powerful man who had no idea he was about to lose everything. If you enjoy stories where one quiet decision can change the fate of an empire, make sure you subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who loves dramatic billionaire romances. And now, let's return to the man at the center of it all, the billionaire who had no idea his wedding day had already become a battlefield. 6 months earlier, the Wolfe estate stood in quiet contrast to the noise of Manhattan, a sprawling stone mansion overlooking the slow gray current of the Hudson River, where the city skyline shimmered like distant glass in the evening light. Elena Hart arrived just after sunrise on her first day of work, stepping through the wrought iron gates with a small suitcase and a letter folded carefully inside her coat pocket. The letter was her employment confirmation, signed by the estate manager, offering a position that most people would overlook, but that meant everything to her at that moment. A maid inside the home of Nathaniel Wolfe. To most people the job sounded ordinary, but to Elena it represented stability, a paycheck that arrived every 2 weeks, and a place to live that did not involve crowded apartments or uncertain rent. She had grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania where her mother worked double shifts at a diner, and where dreams often stayed small simply because survival demanded it. When the opportunity to work in New York appeared, she accepted without hesitation, even though she knew she would be invisible among the marble floors and towering ceilings of a billionaire's world. The first thing Elena noticed about the estate was how quiet it felt. The mansion was large enough to echo when someone walked down the hall, yet most days it felt almost empty. Staff moved quietly, speaking in soft voices, careful not to disturb the order that surrounded Nathaniel Wolf's life. Elena learned quickly that routines mattered here. Breakfast prepared at exactly 7 in the morning. Meetings conducted in the glass office overlooking the river. Dinner rarely served because the owner often worked late into the night. Nathaniel Wolf himself appeared less like the owner of the house and more like a passing shadow within it. During Elena's first week, she saw him only twice. The first time was from across the grand staircase as he left the house in a dark sedan, his expression focused, already speaking into his phone about international markets and a technology conference in California. The second time was late at night, when Elena carried a tray of tea through the library doorway and realized the billionaire was sitting alone near the window. He looked different without cameras or executives around him. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled slightly past his wrists, and the soft glow of a desk lamp reflected across stacks of documents and a laptop filled with lines of code. For a moment Elena hesitated at the door, unsure whether she should interrupt. Before she could turn away, Nathaniel glanced up and noticed her standing there. His voice was calm but tired. He asked what time it was. Elena checked the antique clock above the fireplace and told him it was nearly midnight. Nathaniel looked back at the screen and nodded slowly, as if time had become an afterthought in his world. She set the tea beside him and quietly turned to leave, but he spoke again before she reached the door. He asked why someone working such a long day was still awake. Elena answered honestly, saying that someone should be awake if the house itself never seemed to sleep. Nathaniel studied her for a moment, not with suspicion but with curiosity, as though he rarely heard simple honesty inside rooms filled with powerful people. That brief exchange lasted less than a minute, yet something subtle shifted after that night. Elena continued her duties like every other employee, polishing banisters, preparing guest rooms, arranging flowers in quiet hallways. But occasionally she would notice Nathaniel passing through the house with the same distant expression he carried everywhere. The difference was that now he sometimes nodded when he saw her. It was a small gesture that most people might overlook, but in a mansion built on silence it felt like recognition. Weeks passed, and the estate continued its quiet rhythm until the day Victor Sterling arrived with his daughter Vivian. Their visit brought a new energy into the house, louder conversations, expensive laughter, and the unmistakable atmosphere of people who expected the world to move according to their plans. At first Elena believed they were simply business partners visiting for negotiations, but the way Vivian walked through the halls suggested something else entirely. She studied the rooms as if she were already imagining them as her own. And somewhere deep inside the quiet routines of the Wolf estate, a new chapter had begun without anyone fully realizing what it would eventually become. Victor Sterling arrived at the Wolf estate with the quiet confidence of a man who understood power better than most people understood conversation. His car rolled through the iron gates late on a bright autumn afternoon, sunlight reflecting off the polished black surface as if announcing the arrival of someone who had never spent a day outside the world of influence. Elena noticed immediately that the atmosphere inside the mansion changed the moment he stepped through the front doors. Staff straightened their posture. Conversations became shorter. Even the estate manager spoke with a careful tone as he welcomed the guest inside. Victor Sterling was not simply another investor. He was one of the most respected financial strategists on the East Coast, a man known for building alliances that reshaped companies worth billions of dollars. But it was not Victor who drew the most attention that day. It was his daughter. Vivian Sterling entered the house with a presence that seemed designed for grand ballrooms and camera flashes. Her long, ivory coat moved lightly behind her as she walked across the marble floor, and every movement carried a natural confidence that made it clear she was used to being admired. When she smiled, people responded instinctively, the way audiences respond to someone who already knows how to command a room. Elena observed quietly from the hallway while carrying a stack of freshly pressed linens toward the guest wing. Vivian spoke warmly with the staff, thanking them politely. Yet there was something beneath her charm that Elena could not quite define. It was not arrogance exactly. It felt more like calculation. As if Vivian measured every room she entered and mentally rearranged it according to her future plans. During the first evening of their stay, the mansion hosted a private dinner in the long dining room overlooking the river. The table stretched nearly 20 feet beneath a chandelier that scattered warm light across crystal glasses and polished silverware. Elena moved silently along the walls with the other staff members, refilling water glasses and adjusting plates while executives and investors spoke about market expansion, software licensing, and the next generation of artificial intelligence systems. Nathaniel Wolfe sat at the center of the table, calm and composed, answering questions with the same thoughtful precision he used during international conferences. Yet Elena noticed something unusual that night. Whenever Vivian spoke, Nathaniel listened more carefully than usual. It was not attraction in the obvious sense, not the eager attention that gossip magazines like to describe when powerful men met beautiful women. Instead, it looked like respect, the kind formed when two people recognized intelligence in each other. Vivian spoke about investment strategy with confidence that surprised several of the older executives at the table. She described long-term infrastructure planning and the potential influence of emerging technology in global markets, explaining ideas that many people would hesitate to discuss in front of a billionaire founder. Nathaniel asked her questions, occasionally leaning forward slightly, and for the first time Elena saw a spark of interest in his otherwise controlled expression. Over the following weeks, Victor Sterling visited more frequently, sometimes bringing Vivian along, sometimes meeting privately with Nathaniel in the glass office overlooking the Hudson River. The estate gradually adjusted to their presence. Staff prepared the guest suite whenever their car approached the gate. Fresh flowers appeared in the dining room before each visit. Conversations in the halls occasionally included quiet speculation about business partnerships. Elena did not participate in those conversations, but she listened the way someone learns to read weather patterns. And the pattern was becoming clear. One evening, while polishing the brass railing along the upper balcony, Elena overheard the estate manager speaking softly with another employee. The words were not meant to travel far, but the open space carried them upward through the stairwell. The manager mentioned that the board of Wolfe Technologies had been encouraging Nathaniel to consider marriage, suggesting that a powerful alliance could strengthen the company's long-term stability. Elena paused for a moment with the cloth in her hand, staring across the living room below where the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the marble floor. At that time, the idea sounded distant, almost theoretical, like something discussed in business articles rather than real life. Yet weeks later, the mansion hosted a small engagement celebration for close partners and investors, and Vivian Sterling stood beside Nathaniel Wolfe with a diamond ring, catching the warm glow of candlelight. Guests applauded politely. Champagne glasses touched with soft musical notes. And while everyone celebrated what looked like a perfect union between two powerful families, Elena noticed a small detail that no one else seemed to recognize. Vivian walked through the halls of the mansion with the quiet confidence of someone who already believed the future belonged to her. The engagement changed the rhythm of the Wolfe estate in ways that even the quiet walls seemed to notice. In the weeks that followed the celebration, the mansion became busier than Elena had ever seen it. Event planners arrived with folders filled with sketches and schedules. Florists measured the height of staircases and doorways. Tailors visited with garment bags that carried fabrics softer than anything Elena had ever touched. The wedding was being prepared with the precision of a corporate launch, every detail carefully planned months in advance. Yet beneath all the elegant preparation, Elena sensed something else unfolding, something less visible than flowers and invitations, but far more important. Vivian Sterling began spending longer periods at the estate, sometimes staying overnight in the guest wing that overlooked the river. She moved through the mansion with growing familiarity, greeting staff by name and occasionally pausing to adjust a piece of decor as if testing the authority of someone who expected to belong there permanently. At first, Elena assumed the changes were natural. After all, the woman was about to marry the owner of the house. But small moments began to feel unusual. Vivian often used Nathaniel's private office even when he was not home, sitting at the long glass desk while reviewing documents on a tablet. Sometimes Victor Sterling joined her there for quiet discussions that lasted an hour or more. When those conversations ended, the two of them would leave the office with expressions that suggested satisfaction rather than simple business planning. One rainy afternoon, Elena was assigned to prepare the guest suite before another evening meeting between Victor and Nathaniel. The sky outside had turned a soft gray, and the river looked almost silver beneath the drifting clouds. Elena moved methodically through the room, replacing fresh towels in the bathroom and smoothing the edges of the bedspread with careful precision. While cleaning the small writing desk near the window, she noticed a folder partially hidden beneath a stack of printed schedules. Normally, she would not pay attention to paperwork left behind by guests, but the folder had slipped open slightly and revealed a heading printed in bold letters across the top page. The words read Amendment to Pre-Marriage Agreement. Elena hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the desk as the quiet rain tapped gently against the glass outside. She knew it was not her place to read private documents. Yet the page remained visible, and curiosity slowly overcame hesitation. She glanced toward the hallway to confirm she was alone, and then carefully lifted the corner of the paper. The document contained legal language that stretched across several paragraphs, but one section near the center caught her attention immediately. It described a conditional transfer of voting shares within Wolf Technologies that would take effect upon the legal confirmation of marriage between Nathaniel Wolf and Vivian Sterling. Elena read the paragraph twice before the meaning settled clearly in her mind. If the agreement were finalized exactly as written, Victor Sterling would gain controlling influence over more than half of the company's board votes. The transfer would not happen immediately in public view. Instead, it would activate through internal governance procedures during the next scheduled board session. Elena placed the paper back inside the folder with careful precision, her heartbeat suddenly louder than the quiet rain outside the window. At first, she wondered if she had misunderstood the language. Perhaps it was a routine legal adjustment connected to corporate investment. Yet the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt. Nathaniel Wolf was known for protecting the independence of his company. He had built Wolf Technologies from a small startup into a global leader precisely because he resisted outside control. Why would he sign an agreement that quietly gave that control to someone else? Elena closed the folder and stepped away from the desk just as footsteps approached in the hallway. Vivian entered the room with her usual composed smile, carrying a phone in one hand. She thanked Elena politely for preparing the suite and asked whether everything looked ready for the evening meeting. Elena answered yes and moved toward the door, but as she passed Vivian, she noticed the woman glance briefly toward the desk where the folder rested. It was not a nervous glance. It was calm and confident, the look of someone who already knew exactly what that document would accomplish once the wedding vows were spoken. After that afternoon, the quiet routines of the Wolf estate no longer felt ordinary to Elena. Every hallway, every meeting, every polite conversation between executives now carried a hidden weight she could not ignore. At first, she tried to convince herself that the document she had seen might still have an innocent explanation, perhaps a complicated financial structure that someone outside the corporate world would struggle to understand. Yet the uneasy feeling refused to disappear. During the following days, Elena began noticing details that once seemed harmless, but now formed a pattern she could not unsee. Victor Sterling visited the estate more frequently, often arriving late in the evening when most of the staff had already finished their duties. His meetings with Nathaniel were longer than before, sometimes stretching well past midnight inside the glass office overlooking the Hudson River. When the meetings ended, Victor always appeared calm, even pleased, while Nathaniel usually returned to the library with the distant expression of someone carrying the weight of decisions that reached far beyond the walls of his home. Vivian's presence also changed in subtle ways. She continued to charm guests and speak warmly with the staff, yet Elena occasionally caught glimpses of a colder calculation behind her elegant smile. One evening, Elena was arranging fresh white lilies along the long dining table when Vivian entered the room, speaking quietly on her phone. She did not notice Elena standing near the window at first. Vivian's voice was soft but firm as she said that the board meeting schedule had already been confirmed and that the final signatures would happen immediately after the ceremony. She paused briefly, listening to the person on the other end of the call, then responded with a confident laugh that carried through the quiet dining room. She said that once the vows were spoken, everything else would fall into place exactly as planned. Elena remained still beside the table, pretending to adjust the flowers while the meaning of those words slowly settled in her mind. The wedding was not simply a celebration. It was a deadline. That night Elena could not sleep. The small room provided for the staff overlooked the eastern side of the estate where the city lights shimmered across the distant skyline. She sat beside the narrow window with the document's language repeating in her thoughts. Conditional transfer of voting shares. Activation upon legal confirmation of marriage. Board session immediately following ceremony. The more she remembered the phrases, the clearer the picture became. Nathaniel Wolfe believed he was strengthening his company through an alliance. Yet the agreement would quietly place control of Wolfe Technologies into the hands of Victor Sterling. Elena wondered whether Nathaniel understood the true consequences or whether the legal complexity had been presented to him in a way that disguised the final outcome. She considered speaking to the estate manager or another executive who might be able to explain the situation. But the idea felt impossible the moment it formed. She was a maid. Her responsibilities involved preparing rooms, cleaning staircases, and ensuring the house remained immaculate. No one expected her to question corporate agreements worth billions of dollars. Even if she tried to warn someone, who would believe her interpretation of a legal document she had glimpsed for only a few minutes? The following morning Elena returned to her duties with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown. Yet inside, she felt a growing urgency she could not silence. As the wedding preparations intensified, new guests visited the estate almost daily. Florists carried in towering arrangements of roses and white orchids. Tailors delivered the final fittings for Nathaniel's suit. Vivian spent hours discussing seating arrangements and reception plans with the event coordinators. To everyone else, the mansion looked like the setting of a perfect upcoming celebration. Only Elena seemed to notice the invisible clock ticking behind the scenes. One afternoon, while polishing the glass railing near the upper balcony, she looked down toward the living room below, where Nathaniel stood speaking with Vivian beside the fireplace. Their conversation appeared calm and respectful, the way two intelligent people might discuss a shared future. Nathaniel listened carefully as Vivian explained something about the company's expansion plans, occasionally nodding with thoughtful interest. From a distance, they looked like partners building a powerful alliance together. Yet Elena could not stop thinking about the document hidden in that folder and the quiet confidence in Vivian's eyes when she glanced toward it. Somewhere within the elegant plans for that wedding a secret decision had already been made, and the only person who seemed to realize it was the one individual whose voice mattered the least inside that house. The days leading up to the wedding passed with a strange mixture of elegance and tension, as though the entire Wolfe estate had become a stage where every person knew their role except the one man whose life was about to change the most. Elena continued moving through the mansion as quietly as she always had, polishing the long railings, preparing guest rooms, arranging fresh flowers in tall crystal vases along the hallways. On the surface, nothing about her routine had changed, yet every small detail around her now seemed sharper and more important than before. She noticed the arrival of additional legal advisors who spoke in low voices inside Nathaniel's office. She noticed the way Victor Sterling occasionally checked his watch during meetings, as though measuring the approach of a deadline only he fully understood. Most of all, she noticed how calm Nathaniel appeared in the middle of it all, as if the coming marriage were simply another strategic step in the long list of responsibilities he carried every day. One evening, just 2 nights before the ceremony, Elena was asked to bring a pot of tea to the upper balcony that overlooked the river. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the Hudson reflected the deep blue color of early night. Nathaniel stood near the railing with his jacket folded over one arm, the cool wind moving gently through his hair while the lights of Manhattan shimmered across the water. When Elena approached, he turned slightly and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, the same quiet gesture he had used since the night she first brought tea to the library months earlier. She set the tray on the small table beside him and prepared to leave, but Nathaniel spoke before she reached the steps. His voice carried the thoughtful tone of someone reflecting rather than asking a direct question. He wondered aloud whether people truly married because they believed in love or because the world expected certain alliances from those who lived inside powerful circles. Elena paused beside the railing, unsure how honest she should be with a man whose world was so distant from her own. After a moment, she answered carefully that sometimes people married to build a future, and sometimes they married because they believed it would protect something they had spent years creating. Nathaniel listened quietly, his eyes fixed on the dark river moving slowly below. He said that building a company from nothing had required more trust in numbers than in people, yet recently he had begun to wonder whether alliances might be the only way to secure the future of what he had built. Elena felt the weight of those words settle heavily in the silence between them. She understood that he was speaking about the marriage everyone else believed was a perfect strategic partnership. For a moment, she considered telling him everything she had discovered about the document in Vivian's folder. The words almost formed in her mind, ready to cross the invisible boundary between employer and employee. Yet the hesitation returned just as quickly. She had no proof beyond a single glimpse of legal language. If she spoke and turned out to be wrong, she could destroy the trust that had slowly grown between them during the past months. Nathaniel reached for the cup of tea and thanked her quietly before taking a slow sip. The warm light from the balcony lantern softened the sharp lines of his usually guarded expression. He looked less like the billionaire who commanded boardrooms across the country and more like a man standing alone at the edge of an uncertain future. Elena finally stepped back from the railing and turned toward the stairs. But before she left, Nathaniel said something that made her stop again. He said that sometimes the most important decisions were not about money or strategy, but about recognizing who was truly loyal when no one else was watching. Elena did not respond right away. She simply nodded and continued down the steps toward the quiet hallway below. As she walked away, the words echoed through her thoughts with growing intensity. Loyal when no one else was watching. The truth she carried was becoming heavier each hour, and the wedding was now only 2 days away. Somewhere inside the estate, the final arrangements for the ceremony were already being completed, yet Elena knew that if she remained silent, the vows spoken in that cathedral would seal far more than a marriage. The final day before the ceremony arrived with a sense of quiet momentum that no one inside the Wolf estate seemed willing to question. Early morning sunlight stretched across the marble floors as staff moved through the mansion carrying garment bags, floral arrangements, and neatly stacked boxes filled with invitations and ceremonial details. From the outside, everything looked flawless, the kind of preparation that society magazines often described as the perfect union of influence and elegance. Yet to Elena, the atmosphere felt different now, almost fragile, as though the entire celebration rested on a foundation no one had inspected closely enough. She began the morning by polishing the long windows in the east corridor where the rising light illuminated the river below. The calm surface of the Hudson reflected the sky like a sheet of glass, and for a moment she wondered how many people in the city beyond those waters would recognize the quiet drama unfolding inside the estate. The wedding rehearsal was scheduled for late afternoon, and by noon the mansion was already filled with movement. Tailors delivered the final version of Nathaniel's suit. Event planners walked through the hallways with digital tablets, confirming transportation schedules and reception seating charts. Vivian appeared everywhere at once, moving between rooms with confident efficiency while discussing floral arrangements, lighting design, and guest accommodations. To anyone observing casually, she looked like the picture of calm excitement, a woman preparing for the most important day of her life. Yet Elena could not forget the phone conversation she had overheard days earlier or the legal document hidden inside the folder on Vivian's desk. Every elegant detail surrounding the ceremony now felt like part of a larger mechanism slowly approaching its final moment. That afternoon, Elena carried fresh towels to the guest wing just as Vivian and Victor returned from a private meeting in the city. Their voices traveled ahead of them through the hallway, low and measured. Elena stepped quietly into the adjacent room to avoid interrupting, but the door remained slightly open and their conversation drifted through the narrow space between the walls. Victor sounded satisfied, explaining that the board members he had spoken with were prepared to move quickly once the marriage was legally confirmed. Vivian responded with the same calm confidence Elena had noticed before, reminding her father that the company founder believed the alliance was a strategic partnership designed to strengthen long-term stability. Victor laughed softly and said that by the time Nathaniel realized how the voting structure had changed, the board would already be preparing its next leadership transition. Elena stood motionless beside the window as the meaning of those words sank deeper than ever before. Until that moment, She had still hoped the situation might be a misunderstanding. Now there was no doubt left. The ceremony scheduled for tomorrow morning was the final step of a carefully planned transfer of power. When the voices faded down the corridor, Elena remained still for several seconds before slowly stepping back into the hallway. Her heart was beating faster than usual, not from fear, but from the realization that silence was no longer a neutral choice. If she did nothing, the vows spoken in that cathedral would quietly erase the independence Nathaniel had spent years building. Yet speaking up carried its own risks. Vivian had already begun to watch her more closely during the past few days, occasionally asking small questions about her duties or appearing unexpectedly in rooms where Elena was working. It was as if she sensed that something within the mansion's quiet order had shifted. Later that evening, the rehearsal dinner took place in the grand dining room, the same room where Elena had first watched Nathaniel and Vivian discuss business strategy weeks earlier. Now the table glowed beneath soft candlelight while investors, advisors, and family members raised glasses to celebrate the future. Elena moved along the wall with the other staff members, pouring water and collecting empty plates while the conversation filled the room with laughter and confident predictions about the success of the coming union. From the far end of the table, she saw Nathaniel listening politely to Victor's remarks about partnership and growth. The billionaire's expression remained composed, yet Elena could not forget the quiet conversation they had shared on the balcony 2 nights earlier. Loyal when no one else was watching. The words echoed again as she carried a tray toward the kitchen door. By the time the dinner ended, the mansion had fallen into a peaceful silence once more, but Elena understood that the calm was temporary. Tomorrow morning the guests would gather inside a cathedral in Manhattan. The vows would be spoken beneath stained glass windows, and one decision would determine whether the truth finally reached the man who trusted her quiet presence more than anyone realized. Morning arrived with a pale winter light stretching across the towers of Manhattan, and St. Bartholomew's Cathedral stood quietly beneath a sky that looked almost too calm for the storm of decisions about to unfold inside it. Black cars lined the street outside as guests stepped onto the wide stone steps dressed in tailored coats and polished shoes, their voices blending with the soft echo of church bells in the distance. To everyone gathered there, it looked like the beginning of a perfect society wedding, the union of a powerful billionaire and the daughter of an influential investor. Inside the cathedral, the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers arranged along the aisle in tall white columns. Elena Hart stood near the back, beside a small table prepared for the reception staff, her hands resting lightly against the edge as she watched the guests settle into their seats beneath the colored glow of stained glass windows. She had barely slept the night before, and yet her mind felt strangely clear now that the moment she had been fearing was finally here. Every detail of the ceremony moved forward with quiet precision. The musicians adjusted their instruments near the altar. The wedding coordinator walked down the aisle one last time, confirming the order of the procession. Cameras flashed softly as journalists positioned themselves near the entrance, eager to capture the moment when the couple everyone was talking about would step into view. Elena felt the familiar boundary between her world and theirs more sharply than ever before. She wore the same simple black uniform she had worn every day at the Wolf estate, a quiet reminder that she did not belong among the powerful figures filling the cathedral seats. Yet she also knew something none of them understood. She knew that the vows about to be spoken carried consequences far beyond romance. The music shifted as the ceremony officially began, the low notes of the organ filling the vast cathedral with a solemn rhythm that seemed to slow time itself. Guests rose to their feet as Nathaniel Wolf walked forward to stand before the altar, his expression composed and thoughtful beneath the golden light filtering through the high windows. Elena watched him carefully from the back of the room. Even now, he carried the calm confidence of a man accustomed to controlling every detail of his future. But the truth she carried had begun to feel heavier with every passing minute. The processional continued as Vivian Sterling appeared at the far end of the aisle, her white gown catching the morning light in a way that made the entire room turn toward her. She moved gracefully beside her father, her expression serene as she walked toward the altar where Nathaniel waited. To the guests, it looked like the perfect entrance, the final step in a union that promised influence, stability, and the merging of two powerful families. Elena felt her pulse quicken as the ceremony reached the moment she had been dreading. The priest spoke gently about commitment and trust, his voice echoing through the cathedral as he invited the couple to join hands before exchanging their vows. Nathaniel turned slightly toward Vivian, and for a brief second Elena saw the same thoughtful hesitation she had noticed on the balcony days earlier. The priest asked the first question that would lead to the final promise. The room became perfectly silent. In that silence, Elena understood that the choice she had been struggling with for days had reached its final moment. If she remained quiet now, the legal words hidden inside that document would quietly shift the balance of an empire before sunset. Her hands tightened slightly against the edge of the table as the priest prepared to invite Nathaniel to speak. The cathedral felt impossibly large and impossibly quiet at the same time. Then Elena stepped forward from the back of the room. The soft sound of her shoes crossing the stone floor turned several heads in confusion as she moved down the aisle with a calm determination that surprised even herself. By the time she reached the space between the guests and the altar, the entire cathedral had fallen silent again. But this time the silence carried a different kind of tension. Nathaniel looked toward her with visible confusion, while Vivian's expression changed for the first time since the ceremony began. Elena stopped a few feet from the altar and spoke clearly enough for the nearest guests to hear, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes now focused on her. She said that before the vows continued, there was something the groom deserved to understand about the agreement waiting behind this marriage. For several seconds no one moved, as if the entire cathedral had paused in disbelief. Then Nathaniel slowly stepped away from the altar, his gaze fixed on Elena, as though he already sensed that the quiet truth she carried was about to change everything. For several long seconds the cathedral remained silent, as though the entire building had forgotten how to breathe. Nathaniel Wolfe stood a few steps away from the altar, his attention fixed completely on Elena Hart, while the hundreds of guests seated behind her waited in confused anticipation. The priest lowered his hand slowly, uncertain whether the ceremony had paused or ended altogether. Vivian Sterling's expression remained composed at first, but the small tension in her posture revealed that the moment she had carefully planned was slipping out of her control. Elena felt every heartbeat echo through the quiet room, yet the fear she had carried for days had already begun to fade. What remained instead was a steady certainty that the truth had finally reached the place where it mattered. She explained calmly that during the wedding preparations she had discovered a legal amendment hidden inside a folder within the Wolfe estate. The document described a conditional transfer of voting shares inside Wolfe Technologies that would activate once the marriage was legally confirmed. Elena spoke carefully, repeating the language she had memorized during those restless nights beside her small window overlooking the city lights. As the meaning of the words spread through the cathedral, the reaction among the guests shifted from confusion to uneasy whispers. Nathaniel did not interrupt her. Instead, he listened with the quiet intensity that had made him one of the most respected minds in the technology industry. When Elena finished speaking, she removed a folded page from the small envelope she had carried with her and handed it to him. It was a photograph she had taken the previous evening with the estate office copier, capturing the section of the document that described the transfer of control. Nathaniel studied the paper for several seconds while the murmurs around the cathedral grew louder. Finally, he lifted his eyes toward Victor Sterling. The older man's confident expression had faded into something far less certain. Vivian attempted to speak, explaining that the agreement was part of a long-term corporate partnership designed to strengthen the company. But Nathaniel raised one hand gently, and the room fell quiet again. He said that Wolfe Technologies had been built on the belief that innovation required independence, and any partnership that required hidden control was not a partnership at all. His voice remained calm but firm as he returned the document to Elena and turned toward the priest. With measured clarity, he explained that the ceremony could not continue under circumstances built on deception. The silence that followed felt deeper than any moment earlier in the day. Guests looked at one another in disbelief, while journalists near the entrance quietly lowered their cameras. Vivian's carefully planned future dissolved in the space of a few sentences. Yet the calm dignity with which Nathaniel stepped away from the altar left little room for argument. Within minutes, the cathedral began to empty as advisors and investors moved outside to discuss the unexpected turn of events. Later that afternoon, the board of Wolf Technologies postponed its scheduled session while legal teams reviewed the agreement Elena had revealed. By evening, the story had already begun circulating through financial news networks across the country, not as a scandal, but as a moment when a company founder chose integrity over convenience. Weeks passed before the world outside the estate fully settled again. Victor Sterling quietly withdrew his proposal for partnership, and Vivian disappeared from the headlines that had once celebrated the upcoming wedding. Inside, the Wolf estate, life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm of quiet hallways and evening lights reflecting across the river. One evening, Nathaniel found Elena arranging fresh flowers near the library doorway, just as she had done countless times before. He thanked her in the same calm voice he had used on the balcony days earlier and told her that loyalty often arrives from the most unexpected places. Then he placed a new envelope on the table beside the flowers. Inside was an official offer for a position within Wolf Technologies, not as a maid, but as an advisor helping the company expand its community foundation programs. Elena looked up in surprise and asked why he trusted her with something so important. Nathaniel smiled slightly and answered that anyone willing to risk silence in a cathedral full of powerful people clearly understood the difference between convenience and truth. In the end, the story that began with a wedding transformed into something far more meaningful, a reminder that power alone cannot build a future unless it stands beside honesty and courage. And sometimes the quiet voice that changes everything comes from the one person no one expected to speak. If this story reminded you that integrity still matters even in a world driven by ambition, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that one brave decision can change the direction of an entire empire.